Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 13 of Legends of Tomorrow called Leviathan. And if you did miss it, that's the name is a reference to the giant robot that Rey fights in this episode. But what you might not know is Leviathan, of course also a name of a famous monster from the Bible, but it's also a reference to a book written by Thomas Hobson back in the 1600s. And it's a really, really famous book, kind of talking, as long and the short, it's kind of about politics and the social contract and all this other stuff. But basically, Hobson says that, and this is extremely well informed by his experiences during the English Civil War, basically, in a nutshell, that it's better for a country to be united under a leader who is perhaps, even brutal and dictatorial, rather than not having a strong leader in charge of things, because that's just going to cause everything to descend into civil war and chaos, and that's bad for everybody. So basically, even a tyrannical leader who keeps the country together is better than not having a leader at all and having the country just fall to pieces. And this is basically kind of what is being advocated with putting Vandal Savage in charge of the world in 150 years in the future. The world has basically gone to crap. Of course, it's gone that way because of Vandal Savage, but it's the idea that if Vandal Savage can go out there and kind of at least instill some degree of order, no matter how fascistic it might be, that's better than what uh, would be what it was before. So while it's pretty easy to sort of just dismiss Cassandra and the people that work for Savage as brainwashed or fools, there is genuine, long-standing political philosophy and thought behind what it is they're saying. Um, there are a lot of similar ideas in politics. They're often kind of called sort of strongman politicians. Countries who are having hard times, and somebody will come along and say like, "Hey, follow me. I'll make us strong again. I'll make us rich again. I'll make us powerful again." Guys like Joseph Stalin is really a great example of that. Mussolini was a great example of that. You know, Mao Zedong, and I mean, there have been guys like this all over the world, all throughout history, and it's sad to say it's a really old song and dance, and yet people will buy into this. And there's a lot I could say about what's currently going on in American politics in regards to this idea, but we're gonna try and keep things fun around here. So let's get into things and talk about the people fighting against the immortal murderous dictator. So this episode we're introduced to Vandal Savage's daughter, Cassandra, most likely based on his daughter from the comics, who is called Scandal Savage. Yeah. Okay, but despite the ridiculous name, Scandal Savage actually is a pretty cool character. I read a decent bit of stuff with her in the old Secret Six comics by Gail Simone, which were really, really quite enjoyable. And I can't help but have a really nice, fun, little bit of fun for her because she was basically in a relationship with Knockout, who was a female villain. Yeah, Scandal Savage likes the ladies too. Who I was first introduced to years and years ago in the Superboy comics. So she was one of those characters that was, didn't really that really Simone had been around for a while, but Gail Simone really took her and really made Knockout shiny. And like I said, I've been kind of fond of that character for quite some time before then. And having somebody with the caliber as a writer as Simone take that character and really spiff her up and make her really, really interesting, and then kind of have her bounce off Scandal Savage, who was also a really great character in her own right. Really cool stuff. Now here we don't really get a lot of time to really read into Cassandra, and Snart manages to succeed in turning her against her dad very, very easily. But at the end of the day, it's a 1 hour show, and there's only after this episode like 3 episodes left. So yeah, but it is what it is. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Okay, one thing before we go on to talk about some of the finer details. All right, so they basically say that London is really sort of the last place, part of the world that Vandal Savage hasn't conquered. I mean, why you would leave one of the world's major metropolitan areas for last is kind of baffling, but okay, whatever. The thing that gets me though is the leader of the resistance in what's left of London is a lady with a very who is clearly speaking in an American accent. Like, seriously? Seriously. That makes no damn sense at all. Yeah, yeah. Okay, just had to point that out there. So let's see here. What else do we have to talk about? So Ray kind of took a page out of Hank Pym's book, grew himself to enormous size, which I think the Atom has done a few times in the comics, which is kind of odd, but not entirely unfitting, as one of the Atom's main adversaries is Giganta. But yeah, and then having him fight the robot, which again, cool and all. The thing though is it's like the robot throws the ship and then says, "Oh, it's going to take the robot an hour to walk to it." It's like, how the hell slow is this robot? I mean, if you had to throw something, okay, we're just gonna have to let that go. But the thing that also gets me about Ray fighting this robot is that he grows to enormous size. In most situations in the comics, the Atom would actually shrink himself down, go inside the machine or whatever, and then just start sabotaging it from the inside, which frankly makes a whole hell of a lot more sense and is much more in keeping with stuff we've seen Ray in the past. Ray do in the past. Yeah. Um, Nothing really particular to say about Jax this episode. He was sort of relegated to the role of cheerleader for Ray, which I was kind of felt a little let down over. Also, is it just me or is this like, wait a minute, since when has Jax had those tattoos? Also, kind of funny how when Stein got stabbed and sedated, there was no effect at all on Jax whatsoever. Uh, Speaking of Stein, it was kind of nice to him once we have sort of the chance to step in there and sort of play the wise older man who kind of reminds people it's like, hey, you need to make the moral decision here. And again, that just kind of goes to feed into Stein's character as well as his character development, where previously he was kind of portrayed as kind of a dick. Here he's the one who's like very passionately advocating uh, compassion. And again, you don't really need to be. You'd have to be pretty darn heartless to want to leave behind a bunch of innocent helpless refugees who are about to be murdered by a giant robot. Again, we're not going to talk about what's currently going on in real world politics, but do take a moment to dwell, shall we say. Alrighty then, moment over. Nothing particular to say about Sarah this episode, which of course brings us to our subplot with Kendra. Now, okay, getting a hold of that bracelet and covering Carter's old mace in it so that it too can also be a weapon that could kill Vandal Savage. Okay, that's cool. I like that. It really goes a long way to really sort of making it Kendra's, well, Kendra's weapon of choice. Because one of the things in the comics is both Hawkman and Hawkgirl use a mace as as their kind of their iconic weapon. And if we get Carter back in the future, which this episode strongly indicates we might, that way we could visually, if we were looking at their maces, very easily visually tell which one was whose, which is cool. And again, the idea of, hey, wouldn't Carter reincarnate in the future too? All right. Okay, now one thing about this episode really, I didn't realize that they were always going to look exactly like their previous incarnations, no matter how many times they were reborn. I thought they were just sort of, for the sake of simplicity, having the actors just sort of always play their past incarnations, and that's not what they really looked like. It was just a storytelling device for the sake of simplicity. Also, keeping in the kind of the comics, um, when the various incarnations of Hawkman and Hawkgirl throughout the ages have not always been Caucasian people. I mean, I can recall at least once where they were like an African prince and princess. They were Egyptians. Although, if you know anything about like ancient Egypt, you know there's actually exactly what ethnicity ancient Egyptians were is a matter of actual real debate. In fact, they performed DNA tests on the mummy of Ramses II and discovered that in life he would have had curly red hair, and that's like legit science. That's not something from some crazy website. I mean, you can Google that. So yeah, the ancient world was a much more complicated place than people I think tend to generally think. But anywho, um, so okay, the idea that Vandal Savage has found Carter's incarnation from that era and basically brainwashed him. Okay, that's also cool. But this episode is like has both Kendra and Rip acting like if this version of Carter dies, she's never going to see him again, which makes no damn sense whatsoever because the whole thing with those two characters is they always effing reincarnate. Now, I think what they're probably going to do is just sort of find a way to sort of snap this version of Carter out of his brainwashing. And then it's sort of like, oh, gee, Carter's here, but I also love Ray, and I promised to marry him. What do I do? Because, this causes enormous drama for both for Kendra and Ray, and gets Carter in some incarnation, or at least the actor that plays him, back on the show, or sets him up so that they can do more things with him in the future. Which again is a really great idea, but the execution of it is just such utter bullshit that this is one of those moments where you just look at the TV and you go, well, and say, excuse me, writers, do you think I'm stupid? I feel the word that jumps to mind is degraded, but that's probably a little too strong. But it's just like, no, this is dumb, and I can't believe you're trying to throw this out there and expecting me to buy this. All right, for a show that has such good writers, sometimes these guys, this show tries to cut corners sometimes just a little too much. And sometimes it tries to cut corners a lot, way too much. And this is one of those instances. One of those instances where you just have to say, no, this is nonsense, and the writers made a really bad call in trying to use this as the direction. Basically, we've got point A and we've got point C. All right, A is where we are at the beginning of the episode, and C is what I just talked about a minute ago with that triangle between, Kendra, Ray, and Carter. Both are cool, but the point B in the middle, this episode, what they used to set that up with just the way Kendra acts in this episode, not killing Vandal Savage when she has, for these reasons, make no damn sense. Now, we also get the idea that, okay, the team has successfully taken Vandal Savage prisoner. What are they going to do with him? Um, how is this and Vandal's probably going to find some way to get away, and that kind of puts the whole thing back on him killing Rip's wife and son. Now, I did like how they talked about how Rip had tried time and time again to save his wife and son, and they just kept getting killed. He basically kind of says it sort of feels like the universe wants my family dead and there's nothing I can do about it. Again, that was interesting. So leaving Vandal the prisoner of the team at the end of this episode does set things up for some really cool stuff. But yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff that was potentially set up here in this episode, but it feels like they just threw a bunch of bullshit at us and just said like, and okay, I think my point has been made, and I just cannot properly articulate any further just what utter nonsense I think they are trying in some aspects of this episode. So I am going to call it here. With that said, everybody, thanks for watching. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can join me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and you can also find me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Till next time, take care and have a good one.